Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the BCRC Intro to Fusion 360 tutorial series. So this tutorial is going to be mainly about sketches, and making a blade design like this is a great way to get your hands dirty learning about sketches and the ins and outs of all those features and tools and constraints and all of that. So our goal here is to build this blade right here, and so let's actually start with a desired end product overview, what we want to create. So what I want right here is to replicate a blade like this with a 6-inch diameter. I'm use the measure tool, which is the keybind I, to measure point to point. So anyway, a 6-inch diameter blade with a 3/8 inch center hole and 4, say 1/8 inch diameter mounting holes right there. I also want it to be pocketed to save some weight. Right, let's go ahead and redesign this. So on the top, click on the New Design tab, and Control S to save it. So I'll start off by creating a sketch on the bottom plane. So the first thing we need to do is create this outer diameter circle. So press C for the circle tool, or it's up here, and create a circle. But right now, the circle can kind of just be moved around, right? It doesn't really have a specific dimension, and you can drag it around to wherever you want it to be. That's not constrained. That's not what we want. So delete that circle, and start a new circle from this center point called the origin. The origin is the only defined point, constrained point, when you start a new sketch. So your design should be based off of that singular point. Let's click over there and drag and drop a circle. Now, from there, the circle can still be any diameter we want it to. So press D for the dimension tool, or it's up here as well. I really recommend use keybinds, and click somewhere to use the dimension tool and do 6 inches or something. If you're wondering why you're in millimeters, go to the top left to document settings, units, inches, and you can change that to millimeters or inches. Since most of the tools and materials that we're using are in imperial units, I recommend you use inches. Freedom units. Anyway. So right now this is a big massive circle, but that's just the diameter of it. This isn't the actual blade. That's just a reference point. So I want to turn this into a construction line. So if we go to the right, over here to line type, there's a construction option. So I can make this a dotted line. It's a construction line, which means I can no longer actually click on it. It's not a physical shape that I can click on. It's just kind of scaffolding to build your design off of. So now let's create the center hole and the outer center hole portion. So this center hole and this kind of outer region right there. Go back to the design, press C for circle. And I'm just going to place it over here just to demonstrate something. 3/8 of an inch. And so obviously I could try to put this back in the center like normal, but I'm gonna use this opportunity to show you a few constraints. Obviously I can't exactly bring it to the center. It won't be perfect, so you won't get a perfect circle. There's 2 ways to constrain it to the center. Up here there's a whole tab of constraints in your toolbar, all in red. And they're all a way to constrain one shape to another. Kind of like in geometry, if you've taken that class yet. So the first one I want to show you is the concentric constraint up here. There's 2 circles, one inside another. That's exactly what it is. So press on one circle and the other circle and align it to each other. That's useful, but another useful thing is the coincident constraint, which might even be, it's one of the most used constraints actually. So that puts one point on top of another point. If you look at these centers at the center of these circles, they all have a point in them. So if you press the coincident constraint and select both of them, it'll put it on top of each other and constrain it. So when that line or circle, whatever, turns from blue to this white or black or whatever color, depending on your environment, that means it's constrained and you can't drag it around. To also create that outer center circle part, maybe make it 1 inch in diameter. So let's create the screw mount. So all these screws are mounted in a circular pattern. So guess what? Another circle. C for circle, and I'll create one right there, maybe 3/4 of an inch. So once again, I want this to be a construction line, because now I can select the entire thing. It's not a construction line, it's split into two parts. And once you get a lot of lines going through your shape, it gets quite annoying to select all of them. So that's why we want construction lines. It's also just a good practice to use them. So go to the right and make that a construction line. So let's actually create these circles now. C for circle, and this time click on and point along this circle that we just created. Your cursor should turn into a green X. And say it's an eighth of an inch in diameter. Boom. So once again, this isn't actually in a perfect location, and from this, it's quite obvious that it is in a kind of plus shape. It's perfectly perpendicular and aligned to each other. So to do that, these concentric constraints don't really work. There's another constraint, which is also super useful, up here called the horizontal/vertical constraint. It'll constrain points or lines horizontally and vertically. So if I use that, I can click on both these points, and it's constrained. If your circle was over here, it would do whatever's closest, so horizontal in that case, but vertical in this case. So now I could go ahead and repeat this a few times, or I could use another cool fusion tool called the circular pattern tool. It's in the drop-down of the create menu, so click on that, objects. So you should see this pop-up panel on the right. So for your object, you want to select what you want to replicate in a circular pattern, which is our circle, obviously. And our center point, for a center point, just use this other dotted line or construction line circle that we just created. And you can change the quantity, so maybe 4 or 5 because it looks cooler. I'm going to keep it at 5. And this other options here is quite self-explanatory. I'll give you a moment to catch up. Alright, it's time to actually create the blade profile, which is this outer portion. So to do that, you probably have noticed by now that it's not exactly a straight line or a circle like we've been talking about before. So we have a new tool for that called the 3-point arc. That's in the drop-down of the create menu, arc, and the 3-point arc. It's up here in my toolbar because I pinned it. Click on these 3 dots and you can pin any tool over here to the toolbar. It's a super useful thing, so I pinned it. Go ahead and click on that. And place 3 arbitrary points, one on this this center outer circle thing, and the outer diameter circle, and then somewhere else just to define the curve. Right, now that we have all of that, you'll notice that this is it can be moved around wherever I want it to. That's not good. So I'll Control Z back here, and I want to align this to this circle. And the best way to align a line or basically align to a circle, is to make it tangent to a circle. Tangent line is when a line only touches the circle at one point, and generally it's a lot stronger in engineering. So there's a constraint for that. Up on the top, the tangent constraint, click on that circle and the arc, and it's been made tangent. Cool. But it's still blue and I can still move it around. There's 2 things we need to fix. Number 1, the radius, we need to define that, and also this one point up here. So let's define this point up here by, say, defining the dimension or the degree that this point is compared to this line. So to do that, press L and create a construction line. So I want this to be in a 15-degree arc outward. So I'm going to connect both 2 ends. And also just for a reference line, I'll make another vertical line right here. Right, I can switch out of the construction line toggle. And now I have another problem. I need to set the degree or the angle between them. To do that, it's the dimension constraint again. Press D for that. Select both those 2 lines, and I'll turn from a length or diameter constraint to a angle constraint. So you can select that and say I want it to be 15 or so degrees. Cool. Last thing we need to fix is this radius right here. So you can use that same D for dimension and constrain the radius to something like 4. Nice. But back over here, in this model, you can see that this blade is completely symmetrical both vertically and horizontally. So I could just go back and remake this entire thing on the other side, or I can use another super cool fusion tool, ooh, that rhymes, called the mirror tool. All the way up on the top, it's also in the create drop-down menu if you don't see it up there. Just select the arc as your object to mirror, your mirror line as this line that you want to mirror it by. I already created this one, so I can select that, and it mirrored it for me. Nice. But still, this isn't really a closed shape. I can't select it like I can for this one. So we can close this, as you can see here, by an arc. Let's go back, click on the 3-point arc tool, select these two endpoints, and then just somewhere in between. I know it's blue, but that's okay. Right, there's also pocketing over here. So what's the best way to do that? It isn't a wise idea to remake this entire thing on a smaller scale, because Fusion has a tool for that called the offset tool. This modify section that we don't really use that much. So select your profile, you can double click to select the entire continuous line, click on the offset button, and you can offset it by 1/4 of an inch if I want it to be 1/4 of an inch thick. Nice. Now you've also probably noticed that this entire bottom half is also symmetrical to this top half, so what we can do is use that mirror constraint again. But I don't have a line to mirror it on, so press L for line, make that a construction line, and just create a horizontal line right here. So let's click on the mirror tool, double click on the lines that you want to mirror, select the mirror line, and Fusion did the work for you. Now there's a bunch of other tools that I haven't really covered. There's the center rectangle tool, there's a 3-point rectangle tool, there are 2-point circle tools. There's really a million things that you can do with Fusion in this section. So if you don't know what something means, if they aren't self-explanatory, you can just hover over them and Fusion will give you a really nice tooltip. It's a really cool part about Fusion 360. And there's also a bunch of constraints that I skipped over. They're all super useful. Most of them are, once again, self-explanatory. The parallel constraint, perpendicular. Don't use the fix, unfix constraint, because that's just kind of a cheat to fake constrain something, and it isn't really helpful because you can't change dimensions. So yeah, go through all the other ones and I'll learn about them so you know of them and how to use them in the future. The point of constraints, if you were wondering, is to change your design in the future. Let's say I want this to have a 3-inch diameter, a radius, a 3-inch radius arc. I could obviously change that super easily, and what if I want this entire diameter to be 5 inches and not 6? You probably notice that this isn't really perfect now, so I can fix that by maybe making it tangent to this outer circle, and so that's fixed that issue right up for us. So now it's all constrained, and I can change this to 10 inches if I want it to be. Oops. Oh, it's because of this radius over here. But I can make it 7 inches, and make this 10 inches, and make that 10 inches. And so it's super customizable, you can change it however you want to, and that's not doable without having a fully constrained sketch. But you've probably noticed that I've been skimming over the modify section quite a bit. The only tool that we use there is the offset tool. And the reason why we shouldn't really use many of the tools here is because they ruin constraints. So if you use this trim tool, which is useful in some cases, but it could also mess you up. So if I trim this line, it ruins those constraints. And it gives me a warning down here as well. And there's also a fillet tool, which turns a sharp corner into a curved corner, which is cool in theory, and it really is cool. But you shouldn't really use those two tools because they mess up your constraints. About the fillets, they are super important, and we'll teach you how to do that in 3D instead of 2D. And it'll make your life a lot easier in the long run. Right, now we've hopefully finished your entire sketch, so on the top right, click Finish Sketch, And let's extrude. Press E for extrude, or in the drop down in the create menu. Really, you should use keybinds, and select everything that you want to extrude, and select a width. I'm gonna make it 1/4 of an inch thick. If you're in millimeters and you really want to use millimeters and you're trying to do measurements in inches, 1/4 inches won't work, so you'll have to do 1 inch over 4. And that does the same thing. Right, there we go. We have a blade that looks quite similar to the previous one. That's interchangeable, editable, and really easy to work with. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about sketching, and then you can use this to further your robot build. See you next time.